Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. on the August 11th,
August.
excuse me, October 11th, yes.
I'm supposed to be somewhere else.
Yes. I wanted to remind you that the meeting is being recorded, both video and audio, and broadcast on Channel 18, the local channel here in Eastham. And Jane, I'm think that asking you to tell us what you know.
Okay, well, I'll start with,
Stop for just a second.
Sure.
Before we go to that, I have some pictures I want to show,
Oh,
so you know what to expect.
all right.
These were taken at Little Depot, September 20th at 4:51 p.m. So even before they chase them out of Cedar Pond, they are coming to visit. And I could assume it's going to get a lot worse when those lines go down over Cedar Pond. They obviously, for some reason, they like it over water, because you don't see them on lines that aren't over water.
There's another pond under those power lines at the other end of that stretch of bike trail too. It's in between Great Pond and Depot. There's a little pond. And that
now-
power lines run right over it.
Yeah, I haven't seen them up there, though. I walk
haven't
there
been there.
frequently because of my dog. And so that's how I happen to, on the summertime, I walk later, so it's a little cooler. So that's how I happen to see them.
Has this, because I've heard around town people say that the cormorants compromise the water quality in the ponds below, and I was wondering if anyone could speak to the validity of that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, no, it's well proven.
Yeah.
The information comes from
Get rid of this.
work being done by SMAS under contact to the town of Orleans,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been like that for a while. We never ate fish out of that pond because of that reason. It's always a little off-colored by August.
Yeah.
I've just always remembered there being lots of cormorants there. I guess now people are annoyed by it.
Well, because of the fact, I think, now that people have become more aware of the problem at
caused a
Cedar
problem.
Pond, they realize, yeah. And even though it's called Little Depot, I think it's actually connected to Depot Pond. In fact, if you look on the state
No,
map.
it's not, doesn't go through.
Well, if you look on the state map, this is what's confusing. I had to go back and double check, I knew what I was talking about. There's a state map right at that Samoset intersection on the bike trail, and they call that whole pond, the whole curvature all the way around, they call Long Pond.
Really?
Yeah, and I'd heard that before, that people once in a while referred to Long Pond, and I wondered, what are they talking about? I don't know if anybody knows the history. Apparently, at some point, and in the state's mind, they're still calling it Long Pond, the whole thing. So, I don't know, but,
So are people discussing moving the power lines or shooing the birds?
shooting the birds doesn't
No,
work.
shooing.
Shooing doesn't work. They've been trying that at Cedar Pond for over 2 years now. They've tried all sorts of things.
Someone
setting
goes
off-
out in the morning?
No, they actually have set off fireworks, like rockets. And sure enough, they go away, but,
But then they come back.
they come back as soon as the noise stops. So that they've been negotiating with Eversource to get rid of the lines. And one way to do it would be to put them underground. But Eversource says they can't do that because it would cost $1 million. Excuse me, $1 million, with the kind of money that they make, but they say they can't do that. So they're talking about moving the lines, but I don't know how that works. But I don't see where we could move ours to, because we got water on both sides. If you move them from Little Depot, there's Big Depot, the regular depot on one side, and on the other side is Great Pond Road and Great Pond. And then, they can't go all the way over there. So I don't know, but I know Conservation asked, they asked the Board of Selectmen, and I guess it happened during the summertime or something, I didn't follow it. They asked the Board of Selectmen to write to Eversource. Do you know if that letter?
I believe they did.
What if they ever got a response?
It's an expensive proposition. I'm not sure if they got a response. My understanding is they did write a letter requesting action be taken, because clearly, the birds cause impairment to the pond, so it is an issue, but I know the town of Orleans is negotiating a shared monetary responsibility to
Oh,
get
is
that
how
work
they're
done.
doing it?
And it's not inexpensive, and it probably is going to require a degree of litigation, so. They do have the rights, power companies, to their easement, so it's not that it can't be renegotiated or reworked, but it's certainly, it's not easily done or done without a cost, so I guess I would suggest if, just following up with the Board of Selectmen in terms of what.
Probably worthwhile to see what happened. 'Cause
Yeah.
It is gonna be a problem. But anyway, while I was doing that, it reminded me of this, does everyone have one of these brochures? It's one that the committee put together, I guess, a couple of years ago now.
Having my visors over my car.
Oh, good for you.
I can't say I've
Anybody else?
have one. I
Yeah.
think I,
People always ask me.
yeah, I was gonna add that.
Well, while we're talking about the cormorants, I was just going to add for Suzanne's benefit, the cormorant population has been coming back in this part of Massachusetts for a good 40-some years.
Yes.
And, but it does seem to have kind of reached a surge point in the last, say, 5 years. I'm amazed at how many birds sit on the wires over Cedar Pond down in Orleans. It seems to me in my mind, I can remember within the past 2 years, I was counting up to, say, 275, but there's easily 100 more there this year.
So is that unique to Cape Cod? Because I've heard other people complain about the number of cormorants we have, and so I don't really know. I was like, well, maybe we just are special, and cormorants really like it here, and there may not be as much abundance elsewhere.
Well, I think that
They like fish.
they like fish,
That's what they do, they fish.
and when they started protecting the migratory waterfowl, there was a particular federal act in the, let's just say 60s, 70s on that. Also, they stopped the use of DDT. And I've seen a large number sitting on the rock jetty at Provincetown. That, to me, is another place where they go. But they're definitely attracted to Cedar Pond. And when you stop and think about it, there does not appear to be another kind of natural geographical condition that matches Cedar Pond. And of course, whatever they come up with for Cedar Pond, there's still going to be birds that need to go someplace else. So it's certainly very reasonable to keep our eye on Little Depot Pond up here. I guess I would say to some extent, it's small and it doesn't have multiple uses. There's a couple cottages that people look out and see the water, which is, kind of a nice thing on a daily basis, but we don't have a beach. And I've not seen boating going on, which helps us a little bit, but it's still a concern.
Charles, on that topic of birds over water, what about Great Pond and the gulls that are resident in the middle of that pond?
Yeah, you asked that question, I think, a while ago as to what they're doing. Okay, I'm not an expert. I think there may be two people at the table that are better informed. I have noticed that the gulls appear to sort of go to the center of Great Pond and in a group, and they seem to be just kind of passing the time of day, perhaps like they fed someplace else, and then now they're just coming back to be in a group and be protected, and maybe snooze a little bit or something, whatever boards do. My house is between Great Pond and the marshes for Boat Meadow and for Herring River and whatnot. And if I look up, I will see a seagull either going towards the marshes or towards Great Pond. It's a definite fly route. And so I think these are birds that just kind of have an established pattern of where they go for their food and then where they go just to be
You know,
quiet.
they appear to be bathing, if that's what they do. I mean, are they washing off salt water? I mean, they seem to be
Could be.
Seems like
splashing around and
getting fresh
cleaning.
water and washing.
Yeah,
Okay.
Oh, we also have ducks at Great Pond.
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
lots of,
yeah.
And
But
as things go through, we sometimes get other things there too. for a
the
while.
fact that they go to the point that's the most distance from the shore, all the shorelines, tells me that they're just going there for quiet time, just to maybe not be on guard so much as to what's happening. Yeah. So, Jane, you have,
Okay, I'll
Things for
start,
us to consider?
kind of, yeah, I'll just give you sort of an update on the various activities. First of all, the landfill investigation continues. We just filed a new quarterly report, which is posted on our website. Sheila and I went to DEP in Lakeville on Thursday of last week with both our landfill consultant, Environmental Strategies and Management, and also Environmental Partners, our water consultant. We're trying to coordinate updates to our comprehensive site assessment, which is the landfill monitoring program. And also, we're trying to meet the obligations under the immediate response action plan caused from the release of contaminants from the landfill. So we're working jointly with various departments at Mass DEP and trying to make sure that we remain on the same regulatory plane so that we don't have to go back and reduplicate efforts. So it's really complicated, and they've been very cooperative. However, every now and then, it seems like things that we had previously agreed to, that we were on the same page, when we come back to revisit that, our response to whatever issue it might be, we have a difference of plan of action. And that was sort of the outcome of Thursday's meeting. We have in the works a responsibility to eliminate down gradient exposure from contaminated water emanating from the landfill. So part of this plan involves the mandatory hookup area, where the town is stepping up and sort of drawing a circle around a map, a very conservative circle, and requiring mandatory municipal water hookups from those households so that we're not recirculating the contaminated groundwater that's potentially contaminated and/or may be in the future contaminated. And with this in mind, we had requests early on from citizens in that area for redesignating existing wells as irrigation wells. So we're trying to work through Board of Health regulations whereby we are, when able, allowing homeowners to keep their irrigation wells. Due to our regulatory responsibilities, there are, in some cases, if the well has an exceedance of 1,4-dioxane, that is off the table. We're not allowed to continue the use or recirculation of that water in the environment. And so Mass DEP, that is absolutely off the table. We are not allowed. So we're trying to work through an agreement with the department in which circumstances might we be able to do some environmental investigation to assure or safeguard the fact that where the well is completed or where the point or tip of the well is in the aquifer on a three-dimensional basis does not fall in the path of the plume. We've done a great deal of environmental investigation on a three-dimensional plane to try to figure it out. It's not easily done, and given the nature of this particular contaminant, it's 100% soluble, and it's infinitely soluble and completely miscible in groundwater. So it makes it a very diffuse plume, not a straight-lined plume that may bind to soil particles and so forth. It's very diffuse. So it's very hard to wrap your hands around where the boundaries of this path of groundwater begins and ends. But we're going to try to attempt to do this, and where we're able, allow people the use of irrigation wells that obviously are completely separated from the municipal water supply. So that was the part of our very detailed conversation with DEP. The Board of Health has irrigation well regulations and revisions to that section of our Board of Health regulations under discussion currently. So we have a workshop this week, and then if we can reach some level of consensus on a final regulatory change, we'll have a public hearing at the end of the month, which will be posted, and it's required to be advertised and so forth. So, it's really important that we get this regulation in place, because homeowners are asking the questions, can I keep my irrigation wells? And we need to lay out the specific parameters under which that decision will be made. And this specifically relates to people in that mandatory hookup area. Anyone outside of that area, if in the future, or if when water comes to your home and you decide to hook on to municipal water, there are no restrictions related to the use of a well to be converted to an irrigation well. So this is a specific zone, area that we're talking about for some aspects of the regulation. So kind of a long explanation, but we're working on revisions to our Board of Health regulations, and hopefully that will help to guide homeowners and people involved in actually doing some of the work, because they're asking questions as well. So that's been, a great deal of work on our part, and hopefully we're getting, moving that forward quickly. In terms of wastewater management, I think I discussed this last week, it seems like a lot of meetings that I've been moving things forward on have been canceled or rescheduled lately. So likewise with our wastewater planning, I have a grant that I've been working on to sort of move our permeable reactive barrier investigation sort of to the next step. That's kind of been delayed a little bit, but that is still in the works. That is something I plan to do, and submitting that request to the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative. So hopefully it's pretty much done. We just received some new information which will add to that request. So that's still in the works. We were planning to meet with the Cape Cod National Seashore and the Cape Cod Commission to discuss the drainage at Salt Pond, and also to discuss the findings of our PRB investigation. That meeting was rescheduled, so that still has not happened, and it is rescheduled for the upcoming next couple of weeks. So I really can't give you any further information on that. In terms of Schoolhouse Minister's Pond, since I'm not a limnologist, I'm not in conservation, this is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, I really needed to reach out to people to help me, inform me as to the best course of action. And so in waiting for that response, I did actually receive responses from the town of Chatham. I did talk with Shana Brogan, gave me some comments, and I'm still consolidating what they've added, and I've also contacted our limnologist, and so I need to consolidate that and get all that back to the Solitude, the company that had given us the proposal. So I have all the information in hand. I just haven't gotten back to them yet. So hopefully I'll be able to do that by the end of this week.
Jane, if I can interrupt you there, so we also have Solitude in on permeable reactive barriers? No. On Minister
This
Schoolhouse
is
Pond?
Schoolhouse Minister's Pond.
Yeah, okay.
For the vegetation survey work. What else do we have going on? Oh, I see here on your agenda as the library, you want a status update. The Board of Health had given an approval letter based on considerable number of conditions attached to the revised plan, and we are still waiting for compliance with one condition in particular. So I had received some documentation from the project manager, and I did not, after internal conversations with administration, we did not feel that that actually satisfied the condition. So we asked I asked Sheila to get legal opinion on that. I'm still waiting for a response. So we still don't have clearance to go ahead because one of the conditions required a guarantee, if you will, a monetary commitment by the responsible party to remediate, to repair, to replace, 12 months from the date of the modification to the system, any problems that might be encountered, and we still have not had that condition satisfied. So it's on hold right now until either the project team goes back to the Board of Health and gets the approval conditions modified, or they satisfy the conditions. That's pretty much where that's at. And I don't know if I'm missing anything. In terms of watershed reports, I did get copies from the Cape Cod Commission, and I could forward those to the group if you like. And in terms of upcoming things, this week, I'm actually on the Silent Spring Advisory Committee, so I'm meeting with those researchers on Thursday of this week. And then following our meeting in the morning, there is a public update on their research that's going to be held at the town of Barnstable. And it's in their main meeting room. It is, you do not have to sign up or register to attend the meeting, but they are going to be discussing chemicals of concern in drinking water on Cape Cod, and some of their new projects, which are biomonitoring for tracking exposure to household toxic chemicals. So I think that's some of the new updates. I actually was contacted by a national public broadcasting radio station who interviewed me related to our experience with the landfill for 1,4-dioxane. And, you know, as we've talked before, this chemical is not unique to the town of Eastham, and the more one begins to monitor in the environment, and now that we have such a low detecting capabilities, the more you search for it, the more you're finding it. And so it's just very interesting to revisit some of the more national issues related to this compound, and the fact that Massachusetts has such a low tolerance limit. And states like Michigan have very, very high standards. So, you know, what we are so conservative about is acceptable there. And some states don't have any regulations at all. So it's just an interesting, since there's no federal drinking water limit, it's all over the place. So it's just a very interesting problem, and I don't think this, as Silent Springs points out, these emerging contaminants of concern that we are exposed to continue to increase in our awareness and in our exposure and so forth. So if anybody can attend, I highly recommend it. And I know they usually film them, so if you can't go, you could watch it on video through the town of Barnstable. And sometimes Silent Springs will put a link to such broadcasts on their website as well.
When is it again? When and where?
It's Thursday, and it is October 13th. It's at 12 o'clock, 12 to 1:30, and at the town of Barnstable, in their meeting room, which is on the second floor of the old town hall building, which it's not on Main Street, it's on South Street? Is that South Street or North Street? I always get those two confused. So, yep, Laurel Schrader will be doing the presentation. And lunch is served as well, so, yeah. And I think that's all I have.
You said that there are some findings from the PRB site investigation. Is that something you can share?
Well, yeah, sure. We haven't had the conversation with the consultant yet. That was the meeting with the Cape Cod National Seashore
Okay.
and Cape Cod Commission. So I haven't had an opportunity to ask them. What was supposed to happen is they were going to test the monitoring wells they installed themselves, and then they were going to test the town of Eastham's landfill monitoring wells, because those are multi-depth wells, and so obviously that's going to give us more information. They were, for some technical reason, unable to take samples from the Eastham monitoring wells. And so we wanted as much information as we could going forward. However, we only had the data from the three monitoring wells, which the nitrate levels were not that high, but obviously, I would hope their findings and recommendations would be investigate further, investigate different zones, whatever. In the meantime, I instructed our landfill consultants to go out and take samples from our monitoring wells for metals, for a whole variety of parameters, including all the nitrogen series, so that we could supplement the information ourselves. So we did that ourselves. So that's the additional information that I want AECom to have to comment on. And additionally, that is supplemental information for the grant application that we will be providing to the Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative. Really what we want to do is compile all the data that we've collected on drinking water wells in that watershed for nitrogen, and also combine it with all the landfill analysis that we've done. So we have a great deal of work that's been done. It's just not all in one database. So that's going to be similar to what we did with the pond study. The first thing we did was we had our consultant do a historical review and analysis of everything that's been done. Let's look at everything we've done, put it all in one place, and use that work to go forward. So it's a similar approach that we're trying to do here.
Okay. I mean, assuming they would come up with the conclusion that Salt Pond is a useful place to put in PRBs, is there any sort of timetable as to when that might happen?
Well, we have to determine that that is the answer.
No, I said assuming that they
Assuming-
reach that conclusion.
First, we have to reach that conclusion, and then you come up with a plan of action. If this is a good site, then you have to figure out the more specific answers to the questions, including at what depth, where do you put it, how close to the source of nutrient loading do you put it? Do you put it, what elevation, what configuration, how big? You'd start with a pilot study, obviously, and build from there. But you need to have all the data that points you to the conclusion that this is a good fit and at what elevation and where specifically in the watershed you would put this. So,
Back to the original topic. Using any of the wells for irrigation in the contaminated zone makes me quite nervous, and I would like to see that prevented, but there may not be the ability to restrict people from doing that. So to perhaps propose an economic solution to that is, on the irrigation line for those people in that contaminated zone, we provide a second meter and maybe let them pump 100 gallons a day for 100 days. It should be about 10,000 gallons, and give them a credit for that. I don't know what the meter would cost us. The 10,000 gallons of 10 cells would be maybe $1,000 or $100, pardon me. And I don't imagine, if there's 600 homes in the contaminated area approximately, I know out of the properties I take care of, about 1 in 6 actually use irrigation. But, I mean, maybe as an economic incentive, a second meter on that irrigation, because I don't know if we're going to get a bylaw through to condemn their wells. I don't want any recirculation of that.
well, you are more than welcome to attend the Board of Health workshop on Wednesday, when we're going to be discussing the regulation changes. And then, of course, anyone in the public will have an opportunity to make comment when we have a public hearing. And that hasn't been scheduled yet. So I'm hoping, actually, that it will be October 27th, and that would be our public hearing for any regulatory changes, at which time the public can comment. I appreciate your comments. Clearly, the easiest thing would have been to eliminate all irrigation wells. Simple, done. But we, early on, the town of Eastham, and DEP representatives indicated to the public when we had some of our early conversations that irrigation wells would not be prohibited. So it's a matter of, for those that were in the room and either made those comments, or for those who received those comments, I think there's a desire to stand behind some of the early
The original statement, yeah.
statements that people made when we were supporting municipal water. And I know Adele was probably there for some of those conversations, and, and others. But that goes back to the rationale, why we're trying to, where possible, accommodate that. DEP is a regulatory agency that we have to fulfill our obligations. So it's tricky. It's tricky to do this, and it certainly would be much easier if we just said, absolutely no irrigation wells. We're making a lot of assumptions. Not a lot of people have irrigation systems. So to that point, if you wanted to keep your well, there's going to be a cost to you, because you're going to have the plumber come out and redo the plumbing dedicated to that irrigation well. You have to determine the depth of the well, and it has to be recently tested for 1,4-dioxane to satisfy some of our regulatory requirements. And so with all that, how much irrigation water are you really using? So if you wash your car 3 times a summer, like a year, like I do, if that, you have to individually weigh cost and benefit, and then we have to make sure that it does not present a threat. So there's a lot of complicated decision-making that has to go on both the homeowner side and then on the town side. So, we only have preliminary feedback right now from our water consultant that's out there knocking on doors and making appointments with homeowners. And from what he tells me so far, he's experienced about, maybe 1 out of 5 people has an interest in keeping an irrigation well. That might change when they find out it's gonna cost me money, because I have to have a plumber come redirect the plumbing
System,
and establish some fixtures dedicated to its use, that, you still have the pump, you still have issues and so forth. So it might change. In terms of the health department's role in this as involved in the landfill project, we just have to satisfy critical exposure pathways, and that's complex enough. So there's anyone that wants to comment on this, I've actually reached out to some well drillers as well, because I know that I'm thinking about it from my permitting, processing standpoint, and I don't know their business. So I've kind of asked for comments from them about the logistics of, some of the technical work that we might not be thinking about, that we really should consider, and so forth. But again, anyone who has an interest in, bringing up some of these points related to changes to our regulations, feel free to attend that workshop, and that's just what we're gonna be doing, brainstorming about the process.
Thank you.
Jane, the contaminant that comes out of your well and that gets distributed across your yard with an irrigation system, is the fear that that contaminant would then go back and contaminate new areas of the groundwater? Or is there something else going on? Is it because it's airborne now?
Well, the reason the DEP, very early in the conversation, said that the use of irrigation wells would be considered and may be possible, is that at the threshold where it was coming into the home, it was not deemed to be a dermal or inhalation risk. The problem with the highest level readings that we had obtained in, say, the 40 houses that are on bottled water was consumption, drinking it, consuming it through food product or water use, et cetera, food prep. So early in the game, the DEP said that the use for those other needs that we have, whether showering, washing, clothes, et cetera, was not a human health risk. So therefore, an irrigation well, if you're not drinking out of your hose, does not present a public health problem. And that they accepted that as an option. So your question, on a purist standpoint, is correct, though. If it's in one part of the aquifer, but not in all parts of the aquifer,
I see.
you may, in fact, be
Redistributing it.
exactly. So recirculating the contamination. And if someone were down gradient of you, you may, in fact, be now the potential responsible party, because the
It's not
town.
that we know this for a fact, but it's a possibility.
Well, hydrogeologists will tell you it is a fact. So that was part of our conversation, that that is what's happening. And so we have some level of scientific evidence to support that, where we did some just site-specific investigations and determined that actually the wastewater in the house had a higher level of 1,4-dioxane than the drinking water well going into the house. So we know, in fact, that it is getting redistributed. So it's, the
people
simple
that would-
solution would have been exactly what Mike said,
Well, to Mike's question of incentivizing people somehow, do you know the average cost to run municipal water for your irrigation system? Is it cost prohibitive?
It depends on your own home and your own particular needs. So right now, if you have a water system in your house and you go down your basement, all the pipes are connected, right? The faucet that goes outside, that's connected to the sink where you consume your drinking water. So somehow you have to hire a plumber. In some cases, configurations are
No,
easily.
no, pardon me, Jane, I was just referring to consumption of the water, of the municipal water for irrigation purposes.
It's 10,000 gallons if you have 7 zones and run it for an hour, every
You've
day
done the
for
math?
100 days. Yeah, I just roughly did it for the customers.
And without incentivizing people through some sort of tax incentive?
Just have a
what does it
second
cost,
meter and
Mike?
reduce it from their primary meter and give them a credit for that $100 for the summer use of the irrigation water, or 150, cap it at that. So it's small cost to us and eliminates them. It's a possibility. I mean, I'm gonna do more thoughts on it and prepare some
Okay.
A lot
topic.
of people want it separate though, so that it's not running through their house and making their pipes sweat. That's why the outside pumps are a bonus. You're not making your house
I have
all
a different
moldy
problem.
with
I've got iron.
dehumidifier and,
But in helping our town,
you're right.
Okay, there is.
They can suffer
there-
that
there's
little bit of
some-
damage.
There's some water policies that have to take place. Have to absolutely disconnect in every single case your well, on-site private well from the municipal system, or we risk the possibility of cross-connection. So that's a plumbing standard. So that's in our plumbing policies, water policies.
Water rules and
Yeah,
regulations.
thank you. Water regulation, water policy
They
and
call them
regulation.
water
Okay.
rules and
Yes,
regulations,
so
I
that's,
think.
that's just the,
Let's see what they say.
the municipal system operating protocol. And that's done in any community, or else your municipal water system could be contaminated.
They gotta
So-
have an anti-backflow device.
That is inspected and approved by the town. So that's a given. Now, for, in the situation where you want to keep your well, the cost will be different. I can't, I think, to throw out an average, I don't really know, but you have to figure out that cost-benefit analysis of how much you use water for, on the
Irrigation.
outside, of your home. And think about the gallon cost. If you figure out the gallon cost, and I only use so many gallons, is it worth it for you to spend this extra money
maintain a
on,
whole nother system. Yeah.
to maintain, so
Well-
it will be, that's where it's an individual.
I think you also have to look at where you are in the lifetime of your pump and the lifetime of your well. I mean, once you hook up to that system, if your pump goes, you're gonna have to install a new pump. If you're well along in the life of your well and your well goes, you're gonna have to install a new well.
And,
Or else you're gonna have to pay to undo
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
and get that off your system. And I know one person who's planning to do it, but he also has a brand-new well. I would think anybody who's,
and
Certainly,
anybody outside of the
we have
mandatory
no
zone,
intention of
that's
keeping
not a problem.
ours.
So, however, when in discussing in the mandatory area, downgrading the landfill, as this came up in the meeting on Thursday, hit us a little by surprise, we were told by the Solid Waste Division that as the requirements on monitoring downgradient, the landfill might change in the future, we can't know what tomorrow is the new 1,4-dioxane. We might be taxed with the requirement of testing for new methyl X toxic compound.
NBTE4, 7.
So we may be, in the future, required to test all potential sources of downgradient systems for this new chemical and be burdened with that responsibility. So that's a real possibility, because we know there are other
Contaminants. in the landfill.
contaminants, emerging contaminants of concern. Silent Spring's done an incredible research job on a couple of them that are highly discussed right now, and there are potential standards coming down the chain. Now, if we had we were a potential source of some of those contaminants, any downgradient well that we allowed to continue in use might be required to be tested for things that we don't even know about today.
So, it sounds like when this all came about and DEP was like, yes, you, like, it might be able to be considered that you get to keep it for irrigation, it was more of a like, well, maybe, and now we know more.
It's a different, I think there are different viewpoints from different people in different departments, depending on who you're talking to at DEP. So if you're in the solid waste division, you know that solid waste unlined landfills have a lifetime monitoring requirement in any down gradient receptor that is a critical exposure pathway. A human consuming that water is potentially at risk, and they take no chances. They don't need to draw any, they're hydrogeologists, they know this for a fact. This is their world. The people in emergency response that are, their responsibility is to comply with what's called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, determining releases in the environment and reaching an endpoint. Their mission is different. So they're looking at exposure and risk and toxicology and those types of things. So they're coming from a different place. And then we have to deal with the drinking water folks. So it's three different points of view for legitimate reasons. And that's why I said we're sort of the monkey in the middle. And we, all along, have been trying to keep this circular conversation with everybody sitting at the table so that we get the same response every time, except it doesn't always happen. And it didn't happen on Thursday, so, but, you know, I'm trying to work with them, floating the regulations by them, asking for comments or concerns, you know, work in partnership. And that's always the way we try to work, so that's where we are.
You know, Jane, it's true that in the beginning when we talked about the system and, you know, we're explaining it to people, we talked about the fact that they could keep their private wells for irrigation. But we also talked about connection to the system being voluntary. And maybe we said something about possibly mandatory in the landfill. I don't think so. I don't think that was ever said. Because generally those, and this was also the question that came up about meters, that generally those conversations and those presentations were aimed at the overall norm in the town. We weren't looking to specific situations. And so at some point you said, oh, well, we told people that the, you know, connection was voluntary, but no, we have a particular health problem here. So for this group of people, it's not going to be voluntary. It's going to have to be mandatory. In the same way, I think you could say, in a parallel, that yes, we told people that in the norm you can keep your wells. But now we have an area where the wells present a potential health problem.
Yeah.
So in that area, it's not reasonable for them to keep their wells. I mean, we've just gone through an awful lot of stuff, and I don't know, I think it's sort of like Mike, it makes me a little nervous considering some of the reactions that we have encountered from people in the landfill area, perhaps understandable, but still reactions where they feel the town is responsible for their problem. And if the town allows people in that area to keep their private wells, something goes wrong with that. And it doesn't affect the people who kept their private wells, but it affects other people in that area. Are we going to face a repeat of that?
Yeah.
Are people going to say, oh, well, you said they could do it, so you're responsible for it? I hope that this, I can't, I'm going away. I leave for California Thursday morning, so I'm not going to be around for any of this stuff in the next 10 days or so. But I hope that this is looked at, not just, you know, what's going to happen today or next month, but it's looked at in a very broad way that looks at the whole picture and what are the potentials for difficulties down the road if this goes on. Because you know, I probably won't be around that long, but I'd hate to see the town going through another repeat of what they're going through right now out of the landfill problems.
this is the workshop to discuss this and voice concerns.
Board of Health is proposing some regulatory changes to the well section of our local Board of Health.
Yeah,
Yep, and that is going to, the workshop is going to be at 11 o'clock on Wednesday, the 12th,
oh, so
So-
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Oh,
Here.
Yes. No, actually, we had a problem with the meeting room, so I believe that we have to meet at the police station. But we will post it at
Out front.
the out front. I'm unsure where we ended up. We
so
got
it's
bounced.
tomorrow at 11.
Right, right. And then we will have, we need to, any regulatory change has to be legally advertised in the paper, and then we hold a public hearing. So before anything is adopted and enacted, we have a public hearing. So that it's and it could very well be that as of tomorrow, the board doesn't reach a consensus and there's no final document. However, we've already had 2 meetings discussing, well, regulatory changes, and everybody seemed to be on the same page, but again, anyone that has comments, that's your opportunity. And if there's anyone out there that can't attend and wants to email me comments, questions, concerns, feel free to do that. And again, there would be a public hearing, which is advertised in the newspaper, posted on our website. You know, the information is always known publicly in advance. So that's the way it is.
Yeah, I have attended the Orleans Water and Sewer Commission meetings from time to time. And from that, I learned that the state, I guess DEP, checks municipal water services to see that they aren't overdrawing from their source. And overdrawing in the sense that they're not using water that they don't have to, because there is some sense that that water in the ground is a resource for us now and also for future generations, and we don't have perfect knowledge as to how the natural process go through the replacement of it. So, I can see there's caution with concern for toxics in the well water, but the idea of using an irrigation well essentially substitutes for using the water from our big well field. And I can see a regulator looking at it from those 2 different directions. So,
But already, I remember this from when, little bits of information that floated by when we were doing the water system. The wells, our wells are permitted for a lower level of water withdrawal than the well field would actually, I can't think of the word for it, would produce. I mean, the production, I remember EP going through that with each of the wells, that the potential production level was much higher, but they permit them for a lower level. So I think as long as you're staying within that permit level, I
I don't know if
can't
it's a
quite
half a
figure
million
out
gallons
what-
a day or
yeah.
a million gallons
Yeah,
a day. There's
whatever
been
it
so many
was that
numbers
they
thrown
would-
around.
Also, I think it would be scary if in fact there was so much of this water. Of course, it's not just the landfill, it's the whole town, so it wouldn't be. But the more that comes out of those landfill wells, the worse the potential problem.
well,
Charles, the use of irrigation water, even on every home in Eastham, still wouldn't draw above our permitted levels down
no,
there.
well, no, but it's a concept of
It's a concept.
preservation. And maybe I'd say a little bit more. The first water that comes out of a new well is only been in that aquifer for a short period of time. The more you draw, the older the water
Comes up
in
from
the
the bottom.
ground gets. And it has more mineralization depending upon what other minerals are down in the ground, in that aquifer.
Doesn't that depend on how far down your well goes?
Well, yes and no, but in a general concept.
Yeah,
You
Charles,
just
I
think-
think
but hang
before
on,
you
hang
go
on.
too far,
No, hang on.
remember that they accounted for all of this, EP, in their studies, and their predictions about whether or not we had to protect for minerals and all of that. They looked at all these things. So they must have taken all this
No,
into
no,
consideration.
I'm not saying that isn't true. It's just the other side of a theoretical but not completely known situation. Orleans has to do more cleanup of its water coming out of the ground because of the mineralization that it has experienced that it wasn't experiencing 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, when you attend their plant for the walkthroughs, yeah, they do our washing in their
Right, okay.
fibers more frequently.
So the question is, well, it's certainly our
Water's different now.
Our well fields are in different geological material than what Orleans is. Okay, there's no doubt about that. The question is, would we run into 30, 40, 50 years down the line mineralization that represents the fact that we're now drawing older water? All right, from a regulator standpoint, that's one of the ideas that they would balancing. Now, I'm not sure, I don't really know which one should be the determining
primary.
factor here, but it is, it's true. It's how it works. So,
I distinctly remember EP, and I guess I would think they took this into consideration,
there's no,
saying that we would not have the same problems as Orleans.
there's no doubt about it. I mean, that's a.
Well, I don't think they were looking just as to what was happening tomorrow, because in all of these things, they were looking out, they were talking about how long we could expect our pipes to not live, but how long the
Useful life expectancy.
useful life expectancy of the pipes. So that was my impression of these discussions, but I don't know. I guess if we really wanted to know, we could ask them rather than speculate.
So I think what you're getting at is that if you have more people drawing from that aquifer instead of keeping irrigation wells, you might
Shorten the life.
shorten the time. Or
Or
like
develop a
increase-
problem.
Yeah.
If you ever ran into more mineralization, which
Yeah.
you would have to spend money to treat,
Yeah.
then it would come sooner to the population that's here
Yeah.
than what it would later. Let's see, and I do know that basically the state checks water systems to figure out how careful they are about leakage and wastage. Water that they can't provide to a human that's just escaping in their system. That's being responsible too. That's protecting the resources for a later generation. So,
So that sounds like a whole nother, I don't know if Cape Cod in general is yet has quite gotten to that point of like, do we need to conserve our water? Because aquifer is, you can overdraw an aquifer based on like, if you don't have proper recharge. And we did have a little bit of a drought this summer, but I don't know if anyone's having that conversation quite yet, because we're like, oh, well, it rains, we have plenty of water. But it sounds like it should be had, so then we can model things like that of how much water is being used, how much is like a recommended use rate, so on and so forth.
yeah, well,
That makes sense.
it's, you know, and I've heard USGS say that they think that in the roughly 4 feet of rainfall, precipitation we get in a year's time, 2 feet of that goes into the groundwater. Because it's the sand that we have, that the water could go to a, shall we say, a sink faster in the groundwater than it can flow to the ocean. And, you know, there are other places in the country where the soil is so tight, the rocks are so much on the surface that nearly everything that falls runs off and leaves the area. It's not there a year later for them to use. So, yeah, but just, well, as I say, I'm not an expert, but I've heard these concepts discussed in public meetings.
20 years, we'll be looking at water restrictions if we're using too much water and getting mineralization.
Well, that's kind of what I was wondering, if you wanted to start that, like, water restriction conversation now or not.
Yeah, no, it's just be
Something to be thought about.
Be conscious, yeah.
But somebody must be looking at the health of the aquifer. And, you know, we're talking theoretically here.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean,
We have an
who
organization.
watches this?
The state, that's all
Okay.
part of the DEP.
Okay.
Each
all areas
each
of the Cape?
municipal well had to go through an extraordinarily, about a 4-year process for approval, looking at every single aspect of protection, hydrogeology, long-term monitoring, modeling for 100-year out conditions, et cetera. So it's almost a 4-year process that we've gone through, and an expense of over $1 million per well, with, you know, experts in their field, both on our side and on the regulatory review side. So this isn't done lightly, it's not done in a whimsical fashion, and, you know, you don't build a $146 million program
But, see-
on speculation that the supply, quality, and quantity of water is not adequate to sustain that municipal system.
That's true, but, you know, theoretically, what you're drawing for your municipal supply was, in the past, drawn by individual wells all over this area. So, I mean, I would assume it's a
6,000
wash.
straws in the ground versus
That's
one
right.
straw.
Yeah, yeah. So it's great that someone did a very thorough study of this massive project we were embarked upon, but what was going on years before, we had really
Well,
not
no,
much of, or
there
did
is
we?
some monitoring that goes on of the aquifer all the time, apart from health things, levels of the aquifer. It's a, you know, it's a low water level, high water level. I don't know if that's DEP that does it.
The
but
Cape
for
Cod Commission
example-
actually has a network of monitoring wells that are used for,
Depth analysis?
they're used for a variety of things, including septic design and for different conservation issues. So they're throughout the Cape, depending on where you are site-specifically, we use different monitoring wells. So currently, you can look at the status of those monthly, because the levels are taken monthly. Cape has not experienced the same drought conditions as elsewhere in Massachusetts.
That's what I was about to say.
And our monitoring wells right now are probably the low for the year, and there's a little bit of a fluctuation, but not much.
Jane, do we know what, I mean, when I look at irrigation systems, water comes out, water's
Talking
the
about
lawn.
like irrigation, watering your lawn
Yes,
systems? Okay.
right, that's what we're talking about. Now, that goes back down into the groundwater.
Recharges.
What is lost through evaporation, though, that you have lost?
Not
Do they
much.
know that?
I mean, I'm sure somebody knows, I don't know.
But is it low, would you just
I would
say?
imagine it's low.
And comparatively, states like Arizona and Utah and Southern California and Nevada, they all have like way more information on that. And it's quite high, so they limit when you can water to like the morning or the evening, because the amount that is lost through evaporation. And so my understanding is that we don't have the same problem because we don't experience the same heat, potentially aren't at the same altitude, and it's a little more humid and wet in general.
Yeah, and I could add to that, farmers out west that have pivot irrigation are now going to, not a spray, but a
Trickle?
trickle.
Yeah.
Essentially, they have a flexible hose that almost drags on the ground and just lets out a little bit of water. And where groundwater is scarce, that makes sense. There's a savings to occur. So if that, and that's true, they're doing it
Maybe
now.
I'm misjudging the character of Eastham, because I actually don't see the use of irrigation systems,
I got one out of
No.
every 50
you know,
properties.
as a common
I got
phenomenon
No, it's
here.
very, very
So,
uncommon.
I think that,
If there's
you know,
200
what
in
you're
this town,
talking
it'd be a
about
lot.
is, I mean, I might be just completely oblivious, but I don't see it.
Yeah.
You know, there are some towns where
It's a lot.
the
Chatham.
the percentage of, you know, it's that type of community. That's not what we see here, so I don't think people are fundamentally going to change water use patterns from, you know, from what we're going to have in the future. I just don't see it, but I
My
I
one
could be wrong.
concern would be with the increase in people buying second homes in Eastham, that you might see a shift in the population of people being like, well, I want my yard and house to look like the ones in Chatham, but smaller. So that would be one of my concerns about leaving the irrigation wells, and someone buys the property and decides to put in an irrigation system, and then now you have that. So like, that would be like thinking ahead in the future of a projection of if someone bought a vacation home and that was their value, to have that.
They're pretty hard to control because you don't have a metered source, so,
Yeah.
you know, unless it becomes such a problem in the future, I suppose that the Board of Health could revoke permitting irrigation wells. I can't see under what circumstances that would be a health issue and/or an environmental need, because everything you do from a regulatory standpoint has to be legally defensible. You know, the Board of Health has pretty broad powers, but, you know, it has to be founded on rational, defensible
Yeah.
law.
No, it would more be environmental. If we ever got into a severe drought stage or something, it might be like other communities where you would restrict
You could
outside
restrict,
watering.
right,
Yeah,
right.
and then it wouldn't matter how you're watering, you just
So,
can't.
I mean, you know, those things are all, you know, I guess you deal with that problem unless, like I said, if we may not be thinking of all aspects of this process, that's why I'm inviting, you know, any brainstorming that, you know, someone has to offer, we appreciate. Board of Health has always helped.
They're a very welcoming group.
They are a welcoming group, and they.
They're thrilled to
they
see you.
listen- They listen to comments and concerns, and, you know, and they certainly are open-minded, so I invite all those comments to come forward.
So, well, I'm looking at our agenda and to see what other comments we could make. I guess with that Orleans Water Quality Advisory Panel, I could add that on the permeable reactive barrier subject, they do have a subcommittee that meets on that, and they are going to have a meeting on the 26th of October, and that's just technical discussion. Maybe it would be no more than 20 people. They also have said, though, that they have done all their checking and paperwork, and they have come up with a proposed course of work to go forward, and that they will start putting emulsified vegetable oil in the ground on the 14th of November in that Eldridge Park area, which is, I guess, a quick way of saying it, it's near the Nauset Regional School that sits there. It's near where the ball field is.
Down gradient of the landfill.
Down gradient.
And they
of
did detect an elevation of 1,4-dioxane at their landfill also.
Yes, but separately, I mean, since we have an interest in possible PRB use for, well, we talked about it up there for the Salt Pond area, I would just pointing that out, that they're ahead. They've found their situation to be reasonable, and they have just said in the past week they're going to start pumping oil down the wells. So that's
Pumping oil down the well?
yeah, vegetable oil.
As a marker, as a dye marker?
No, no,
That's the treatment
As
process.
a treatment
as
process?
a treatment, yeah. The,
Treatment, what is it gonna treat?
well, let me say more on that. Okay. Let's see. They have found that the natural microorganisms in the ground will remove nitrate from the groundwater. If they have a source of carbon, they would be doing that now, and the water would be relatively clean, but for the lack of a carbon source. And the experiment started out first by digging a trench and putting in wood chips, but they've refined that now to the point where they just put in wells, a line of wells perpendicular to the groundwater flow, and they pump in emulsified vegetable oil as a source of carbon for the microorganisms that are already there to live on, in addition to living on the nitrate. And basically, in the anaerobic conditions in the soil, the nitrogen ends up being a gas in the soil, and the soil eventually releases it. It works its way to the surface and goes back into the atmosphere. That's the chemistry of it. I look at it as an opportunity to watch
Science.
what's going on, and it's free information that I can use to understand what's going on, because these are public meetings, and I don't ask questions because I'm not from Orleans, but I certainly listen to the questions that the Orleans folks ask at those meetings.
What happens to these microorganisms after they eat the nitrogen? Where do they go?
Well, they're, probably don't live a long time, maybe a week or so, but we're talking,
No, I know, but what,
Back
they've eaten the nitrogen, so I assume the nitrogen is in the microorganism. And then what's the next step?
yeah,
How
no,
does
the,
it get, it's like it's in the oysters, so how do we get rid of the oysters
Eat the
without
oysters.
nitrogen?
Yeah.
This is, how do we get rid of these microorganisms?
well, look at it as a series of steps. The nitrate stays in the contaminated groundwater and discharges into Town Cove down there in Orleans. Without, if there isn't microorganisms, bacteria, maybe a little bit of fungus down there, in an anaerobic situation that will, basically it lives on the nitrate, it lives on the carbon, it produces bacteria tissue, if you want to call it that, or and in that chemical process, some of that nitrogen eventually ends up being released as a gas. Now, it is true that you've got, when you have a dead bacteria, perhaps another bacteria comes along and feeds on the carcass of this small little bacteria or something else going down there, but that's the nature of soil. There are just all kinds of diverse little slowly moving life processes down there.
What, the reduction is the amount of nitrogen that gets released as a gas?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's a conversion. It's a
Yeah.
conversion from one form of nitrogen to another, and the end product is that it turns into a nitrogen gas.
But it's not all of the nitrogen, it's some portion of the nitrogen gets released.
Yes.
as a gas.
It's the chemical process that's called denitrification. So you
Okay.
start as in one form of nitrogen, combined organic or inorganic nitrogen, and there's a conversion, and it requires bacteria to do it, and in this case, the substrate that they're using to fuel the conversion is the oil. How logistically they obtain it in the specifics, I've never seen an experiment of that type, but it's been done for decades. It's not new technology, but that's the same approach we would take. It's just we're still working through where best to put it. They're ahead of us. They've spent a lot of money to get to where they are with their pilot studies. So it will be interesting to see the stages of their,
So this is related to PRBs?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
it's the same
all
exact
right,
thing.
Okay.
Except they're actually doing their testing. They're doing their pilot test,
Okay.
where, hopefully we will go.
Can I ask a general question that I've been wondering about in this wastewater conversation? And I think the talk on Thursday might speak more to it, but in a lot of this, we still just talk about nitrogen. And then we have all of those contaminants of emerging concern. And so I'm wondering is that going to be worked into at a later date, the wastewater plan?
Well, the wastewater plan is by and large in response to some regulatory requirements we have because of the Clean Water Act.
Yes.
from the 70s.
Yes.
And we need to clean up our estuaries. The reason the estuaries are impaired and we're seeing increased algal growth and so forth is because nutrients are feeding
Yeah.
those contained water bodies.
Yes.
So wastewater is the largest component of the nutrients that fuels that situation.
Yes.
So that's why we focus on nitrogen. And in terms of what environmental impacts we're seeing versus what public health impacts we're seeing are two different conversations. So groundwater is discharging to the estuaries, so that's causing that nutrient increase. Groundwater also supplies our drinking water wells, and whether the drinking water comes from a very large municipal system or a private on-site well, it's coming basically, as we said, from the same place. The challenge with a private on-site well for consumption is that it's exposed to that wastewater discharge in very close proximity. So the chances of you cross-contaminating your drinking water is very, very high because every single lot is also a site of discharge for wastewater. So you follow, so emerging contaminants of concern are important for drinking water.
They are not
Drinking.
important dumping into waterways?
And, is that of the highest critical problem in the saltwater estuaries? Not really, because what the problem is eutrophication, and eutrophication occurs
Yeah.
when you have the phytoplankton and algal growth and so forth. Do I think 1,4-dioxane fuels increased phytoplankton growth? No, I think it's the nutrients. You give them enough food, they grow. So, yeah, has anyone studied emerging contaminants of concern in kettle ponds, in estuaries? A little bit, but it's really so expensive. Again, Silent Springs has looked at that, but these tests for these very, very hard, expensively tested for products is so expensive. Each case is like $2,000, to test for it. So how widespread can that investigation take place on an economically feasible level, even when you have grant funding?
Okay. I see your point, I guess.
So expensive to test for.
Yes.
It's also the,
I guess I would just hate to clean up the estuaries and the ponds only to find that nothing can live, the life in those areas are compromised anyway by something else. Does that
it's
make sense?
also a question of concentration.
Yeah,
Even with the contaminants of emerging concern, which certainly is something that we did a little bit of looking at when we're talking about moving to a drinking water system. The levels at which you would have to consume them, at least at this point, based on the studies that they've done, are fairly high. So even if you thought that there was some of that in a water body, that I would think the dispersion of it is such that it would not have the same effects over that amount and a constant intake of it, as if you were drinking it in your water all the time, day in and day out. I think they're a long way from finding out that it may be, and it may, who knows, because I guess what we're finding out is all this stuff is increasing. This is why we're worrying about it now, or maybe it was there 50 years ago and we weren't paying attention. But from the reading I've done, it appears that it's all increasing, because as we've moved into more of these synthetic products, a lot of the contaminants that are being given off are a byproduct of the synthetic products, even the nonstick pans, that sort of stuff.
so maybe I'll poke around in it, because I had this understanding that because you have estuaries and they tend to be little nurseries for organisms, and fish and so on and so forth, that in early life stages, some of these contaminants have impacts on their life cycle essentially. And so I guess I'll just go look into that a little bit
Oh,
further.
that's true. I mean,
So I
that
was
is
just wondering-
absolutely true.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, in my brain, I'm like, well, if we're gonna do it, we might as well like consider all of it or maybe look at all of it, because it does impact things like fisheries. I'm really just curious about how it would end up impacting fisheries, because you'd be like, yes, now the flounder can live here. Oh wait, but they're severely impacted by this at this point, so I understand that you are farther into it in terms of like how much it costs and the
Well,
feasibility
there
of
also-
studies
also a
and so
question
on,
I think
but.
you want to look at is, what would we do to stop it? I mean, the nitrogen is sort of, as Jane says, it's been
A little more
identified as coming
straightforward.
from the wastewater, and so there's an attempt to keep the wastewater, at least either denitrify the wastewater in some way or otherwise keep it from entering those water bodies. But if you're talking about basically something that permeates our entire groundwater, figuring out how you're gonna keep that, I think could be a fascinating subject for some major research, but it would certainly be,
Really, really difficult and logistically
that was why,
complicated,
yeah.
so.
That was why it was thought that that one solution, at least in drinking water, was to go to an area for these well fields, which we are fairly sure are pretty much safe from those things because of what they're surrounded by. And secondly, that we have the advantage that that water will be constantly tested, so that should anything begin to show up in the water, it could be treated immediately.
So, all right, I'm just scanning what we have for other topics here. I don't have any information on froming up with a Park Street stormwater diversion design yet. I asked Shauna, was it Rogue?
Rogan.
And haven't got a reply back on that. Let's see.
Just one thing, looking at this, at our notes from the last meeting.
Yeah.
What's the status of GHD's work on technical memos 3 and 4?
They still haven't completed them, but they are working on them.
Okay. All right.
What's GHD?
That's the name of our wastewater consultant.
I don't even know what the letters stand for.
I don't
did at one
either.
point.
We've used that acronym so often, it becomes synonymous with the name we
that's-
picked.
Yeah, yeah.
It probably does stand for something.
It stands for something.
Here's MWS website.
Let's talk about the Tri-Town situation. The Tri-Town has ceased to operate. It's, I believe the technical statement is that they have gone through nearly all of the decommissioning process. And basically what they mean by that is that they've stopped all functions and they've cleaned out all of the various tanks and containers, and they have gone through the process of disposing of or recycling any of the hazardous materials that they would normally use in that wastewater process. So that would allow them to go into what they call the decommissioning phase, which comes next and takes, it appears, by going through the contracting process, getting bids and that kind of business over the next year. As a piece of that, though, we know that the Cape Cod Commission has gone forth with a study to essentially find out the current state of Cape Cod with respect to its ability to accept septage and process it. And that was asked for really by more than just the Orleans folks in terms of closing the Tri-Town plant, but it fits in with that overall closing of the plant and then making sure there's capacity at other places on the Cape that can step in. And so Cape Cod Commission has, I believe, they've either, where they are on that is that they've written the request for proposals, or in fact, they have now some proposals that have been submitted to go forward with that study. And I'm kind of keeping my eye on that, and hopefully I'll be able to tell you more when we find out more about it. All right, so we've done that. Now, I guess another topic, I guess before, there is a workshop presented by the Association for the Preservation of Cape Cod on the 13th of October. It has to do with stormwater, and it has to do, what I take is that basically the subject off in the direction of what they call rain gardens. In other words, putting structures in on sites that take the runoff from that site and use plants to capture the nutrients and clean up the water. And the speaker on that is, I guess, a Harvard professor. So I think it'll be a good topic, and I do plan to go. On that. The one more topic that I have is that I think it was at the last meeting, maybe it wasn't exactly, Jim and I were asking each other questions about the drainage out of Depot Pond that goes into the small Deborah Pond, then that goes into Great Pond, and then goes on out into the Cape Cod Bay. What I did was I called one of the, let's see, I guess my first call was to folks in the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, and to their office, and I basically took a phone number off the internet and called them and asked them what they could tell me about the program that has existed in the past that provided money to towns to upgrade and improve drainage ways that would take the herring and would take the eels. And so I was referred to a woman by the name of Abigail Archer, and she is at the Barnstable County Cooperative Extension Office, and apparently they have a marine division there of some sort. I spoke with her and asked her how I should understand what the possibilities are. And her comment was that our own Mike O'Connor in our Natural Resources office back in 2010 or perhaps 29 did talk with Brad Chase, who is the state employee in the Massachusetts, I guess it's Division of Marine Fisheries. Does that phrase sound about right?
I don't know.
Well, apparently Mike and Brad did go and look at the drainage way that comes down out of Depot Pond. And at that time, 6 years ago, Brad Chase was saying, yes, this drainage way has possibilities for being upgraded. And however, there was no further money for that to be done. And I learned in that side conversation with Abigail Archer, that the 2014 Farm Bill had restrictions in it that would not allow federal money to be spent in this respect. However, it had been allowed to be spent in this way in the past, because we know we were getting federal money to, say, replace the culvert under Herringbrook Road down there for the outfall for Bridge Pond and Great Pond. But as we stand now, we have a bill that says not to do that. So, and obviously there's no money there to do it. I think that if nothing else, it's just kind of reasonable for this group or another group in town to say, stop every 5 years and say, well, okay, what has the situation changed? Is it now judged not to be a good candidate for a herring run upgrade? Or do we still not have the money coming down from a federal level to spend to do that? Mike O'Connor and I had that conversation, I guess, that was within the past day or two. And so basically, no money, but an absolute thumbs up by Brad Chase 6 years ago for doing something more. I guess I could add that I did go to the site, and one of the big features of it is that Great Pond discharges through a culvert that goes under the rail trail. It's 30 inches in diameter, and it looks to me like all concrete. It has head walls on both sides of the earth structure that supports the pathway. And as far as I could see, that it has water flows out of it when the water level in Depot Pond is high. And from what I could see in the dark line across the head wall, that the water apparently got up to about 10 inches deep going through the 30-inch in diameter culvert. And I say that because I thought I was seeing a line of last spring's pollen kind of stuck on the concrete. And on the other side, it appeared that there was about a 2-foot drop to get down to Deborah's Pond over a 15 or 20-foot long run. So it wasn't. I'm not well enough versed in the subject to tell whether that's has potential or does not have potential. But I guess since we know that Brad Chase saw it, we can say that, well, based on him seeing it, he thought it had potential. And let's see. So we're talking herring. We're talking about eels. And I have found a long-term resident on that pond that, in fact, saw it when it had both eels and herring in it of a natural, in the natural state. I did mention to Mike that there's no water flowing through it now, and he said that is a concern because basically you want the fish to be able to come in the springtime when the water's high, and if the herring spawn, you want the small fish to be able to get back out in the fall, and the big fish normally would leave in the springtime after spawning. If they miss the water flow, my understanding is that they would go back out when the water level comes up again in the fall. So I don't know if anybody wants to add anything more to that. I'm happy we have natural resource folks with longevity in the office such that you can turn and ask them what we know, and they were able to respond. So, does that bring us to reviewing the minutes? Is that,
Oh, okay.
okay? So, Adele, I don't have any notes, any changes. And, so does anybody want to, Jeff, I guess you could, you want to drop the extra E in Bumby?
Oh, I didn't
Oh,
know if I should bring
I
that
put
up
an
or
extra
not.
E, sorry. I should go back and look. I just write these things without going back.
Where is it?
I put an extra E in his name, apparently.
Adele,
It's not
you-
an extra one, there isn't one.
Say that again?
I mean, there isn't an E in my name.
Oh, okay. I put an E in.
Yeah. Adele, your worst day is still heaven in terms of these minutes. They are easy and
Yeah.
Oh, I see
Too
here at
small.
the end.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the top here, and it seemed to be spelled right, and then I see this further down, the E got added, I think towards the end.
Okay.
so somebody want to make
I make a motion, we accept them?
and we have a
I was like,
second?
can I make them even though I wasn't here?
You have a second?
I second it.
All right, those in favor, please say aye, raise your hand. It looks like 6, 0.
Somebody-
No, I wasn't here, should I be voting on?
No, that's right, you would
Oh,
be an
so-
abstain, so it's 5-0-1.
I wasn't here either.
Oh,
Doesn't matter, because I never
Okay,
record the vote
so-
anyway.
Oh, okay.
Of order and save.
It's not one of
if I
those
could
votes I
second
think
it.
has to be
Does.
preserved.
Or, I don't
Who
yeah,
made the
I guess we
motion?
can
I didn't
still-
I did, I made the motion.
He motioned
And you
second.
seconded.
I wasn't here, so I don't
3,
know if I'm allowed to second.
4,
Okay.
5.
So does somebody else like
I'll
the
second
motion?
this.
All right,
Okay.
thank you, Jim.
All right, and then vote again. Let's keep it all legal.
Okay.
Vote again.
All right, so those in favor?
All right.
So, okay, so I've got 5. I've got,
abstains.
2 abstain.
And 2 abstains. 5-0-2,
I don't vote.
right. So, I was going to call your attention to the fact that the 15th of November is on our schedule to meet, that we're not meeting on the 8th because that's the election day. So everybody's okay with 15 November?
I'll be in Newark for an annual meeting for my alumni association on that date.
Oh,
So can
okay.
you still
I'll be
feel
in
the quorum
Ireland.
without me?
Should be able
You'll
to.
be in Ireland. That's nice.
Whereabouts?
Ireland?
No,
Yeah.
no, she'll be in Ireland,
I don't
I'll be
know.
in
We're
Newark.
gonna go on the west
You'll
coast.
be where?
Oh,
Newark,
it's
New
beautiful
Jersey.
country.
Yeah, have you been?
All right.
Have any traveled?
I think
to
I'd
Korea,
rather
though?
be in Ireland.
Places to go?
I could
Places to
probably
stay?
I could probably give you some ideas. Well, actually, we're all still on the air.
Okay.
But we almost universally stayed in B and Bs.
Do you remember some of the good ones?
I can
So,
look
well,
back at our
the-
notes.
Before we do that,
I think I heard a motion to
to
adjourn.
adjourn, yes.
And we had a second on that?
Yes.
Yes, we approved, yep, so looks like that's, what's that, 6, 7?
Seven,
Yep, 7-0.